Laurie Lorenz began her formal education in trauma recovery at UCLA, completing her bachelor's in psychology with emphasis in physiological psychology. While there, she worked on cutting-edge research, identifying the effects of stress on the developing brain, research with frightening implications for using stress to control the development of her brain's with frightening implications for using stress to control the developing brain's emotional reactivity. After doing her own trauma recovery work, she earned her master's degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University, immediately beginning her career working with sexual abuse survivors, mothers of abused children, and their perpetrators. For over 20 years, Laurie has specialized in complex cases of sexual abuse, including cult satanic ritual abuse, torture, and programming, including apparent MK Ultra victims. Laurie has developed and teaches the IMAP system for understanding the recovery journey out of trauma. EFT founder Gary Craig featured her in his specialty series DVD training program. Laurie was also one of 5 EFT experts for his week-long intensive with veterans suffering from combat PTSD, released on the documentary Operation Emotional Freedom. I'm going to depart from the script here for a second. Laurie's been a dear friend and tremendous supporter of my work with the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library, and this event would not be happening if it wasn't for Laurie's support and encouragement and all the work we did together with the other speakers to craft this event. I really want to say a very special thank you to the presenters and to all of you for having the courage to come and examine these issues with courage and integrity. So with that, I would like to introduce my dear friend and supporter, Laurie Lorenz.
You heard a little bit about how my work started. And can you hear with that? Okay. And what happened for me when I started working with people in a center that focused on incestuous families was that I got a whole nother picture of what was out there. And I had people start to describe to me experiences that didn't make sense. It sounded like, are these people delusional? What is going on here? And it forced me, I said at the beginning, to start really digging in to what's there. And I found, first through my clients giving me this information, I found the literature out there that validated it, that gave me a context for it. And it was so interesting, you sometimes feel like you're guided in your work. And as I got more clients, they would bring a new piece of information. Sometimes I'd be compelled to pick up a book and start reading on this material. And 3 weeks later, someone who was recounting that, who had no idea about the literature, that was just their experience, is describing what I've been reading. And inside is going like, oh, okay, yes. And it started painting a picture for me of what's real. I had to let that in. I had to let it change me. And I really want to honor that however much exposure you've had or experience you've had here today, that you've come to a place where you're allowing yourselves to be changed too. And this is big. This is what we need. I want to honor that and been there. It feels, sometimes it really is a physical feeling in the brain, like something's going tweak. But if we just sit with it and stay with it and not push it away, something happens and we start to open more. So I'm going to be talking some about what my clients have shared with me, and then I'll be going into more about psychopaths and their actual characteristics. Some of it's been covered already, so I may be able to go through some of that fairly quickly. And we're going to go into the psychopath's brain and the differences between a normal brain and a psychopathic brain, and then how they use our own brains and the way our brains normally function to control us. Okay? They can do it on a small scale in a torture situation. They do it on a mass scale with all of us doing the same basic thing. And as with the information we've had, we can recognize that more and more, then we can start to change how our own brains respond to that stimulus. What they would do in those controlled situations with drugs and torture and pain to disorient and make parts of our brains take over for survival, parts of the limbic system, the brainstem, take over to where we no longer have choices. That's why he's saying any of us can be pushed to that point. But in this environment where there's a setup for us to live that way, to where we are always in a stressed state, where we can't access our higher brain centers, then our more self-preservation brain centers are going to govern our reactions. Okay, as simple as if you can't get a mate unless you have this car, okay, and you're going to be lonely and an outcast all your life unless you have this product, or smell this way, or wear these clothes, then we're in a fear state. We're fear of loss, we're fear of shame. Shaming is huge in our culture, not looked at, not mentioned, but it's huge, goes right to the core of our being. These techniques are used to keep us in an alarm state. They keep really our limbic system in an alarm state. So what we've been talking about, and what I'll talk about at the end, are ways that we can actually work with our own brain and keep that alarm state from taking over, so that they can't run us down whatever chute they want because we're in that alarm state. So that's kind of an overview, if I can get that done in an hour. So the kinds of clients that came to me, and they kind of very kindly, the intensity of the kind of material that came to me through clients was gradually increased. Include people who had been exposed to what we would call cults, satanic cults, and some who had been in a combination of a cult setting or a group setting, and then they were taken places for a very different kind of programming, the kind of programming that we're talking about with MKUltra. And in those settings, it was very often a hospital setting. It was very often a very cold and mechanical kind of setting. And that's where, in the cults too, they used drugs. But they used drugs a little differently here. And they used torture, and in a way that was very precise. And one of the more common ones was electrocution. It's hard to hear, okay? Remember the points? Okay, breathe. Okay, remember those points. Through my clients' eyes, I got to see into the eyes of the people who would do this. These really are the psychopaths who are lacking those brain structures. They're the ones who touch a level of coldness and focus that, it's like you couldn't imagine reaching that state. And they have a sadistic enjoyment of it. And they're this is a weird thing about this, is we think of empathy as being able to feel what another person feels. They don't feel what's being felt, but they sense more from a mental place. They really have an acute, incredibly amazing ability to sense exactly what that person's feeling, where they're at the edge and how close they are and how far they can push them. And sometimes they want to push a child over the edge and have them break down and no longer be able to trust their own sense of self. Sometimes with the children that maybe it's their own children or the children they want to cultivate and bring along, they'll bring it with the attitude of, you have to be really strong. You have to tolerate this. And then it gets raised, and no, you stay right there. And they're reading that person, that child, in a way that is so coldly intelligent it's wild. And there's almost, you could almost say psychic in the way they can read where that person is. And to have someone from these people's side of it, to have someone able to read into you, a part that's confusing about this kind of abuse is called a trauma bond. And they intentionally cultivate this. When someone has seen into you that deeply and seen what you are experiencing, how desperately you are trying to hold yourself together and survive what's happening, there is something that happens in our psyche, because there is paradoxically a level of, you can only call it intimacy, in the most bizarre form. An intimacy of being seen in a way that in very healthy ways we seek. We must have as children, to be seen and heard and connected with, belonging, loved. That's how we bond, and that's how we develop in a healthy way. But what these people do is take that very beautiful part of being human and they connect it with this kind of torture. And they know exactly what they're doing. They have had feedback between CIA and sadistic behavior that's been around for, probably as long as humans have been controlling one another. And they've refined it. And then since the 1940s, since we've had technology, since the Nazis and Mengele, who was key in this, there has been a precision in this work. And the people I work with, who to me are the most amazing people on the planet, because they have survived this. They're not medicated in a hospital, they're not drugged, they're still alive, and many aren't. They have survived this, and something in them has a spark to live that just, it cracks me open. And it brings me a joy in this kind of work, to see what is human and how we can come through this and wake up out of it. And to keep seeking that health, to keep seeking wholeness when they've been fragmented this way. So when I speak about these psychopaths in a bit, I'm speaking about what these people, these amazing people, have survived. And what we have in us as humans to make it through this, to come out. And the people, when they are coming out of this, they've got to be big souls. They've got to be huge souls to come through that. And they have something to say in this world. And as they come out of it, I really encourage them, you've really got something to say. And this is something important to say. So in the midst of this horrific material, know that there is something that can so light us up with the beauty and the amazement of who we are as humans, intact humans, in the face of people who are not intact. And there are people actually who counter this. There's, when I was first in my internship and in my work, it was when the false memory syndrome people were coming out. And here was an organization really trying to undermine the reality of what was coming out. And their material was, you could see right through it. But they had the clout, they had the money, and they yelled loud enough. And if you can create doubt, then you undermine the acceptance of a person's experience. And psychiatry and psychology and all, it follows the DSM and psychiatry, has a tendency to pathologize anyway. And so someone relates an experience that is unbelievable to the therapist. So what does the therapist do? They refer to their professional standards and they say this must be delusional because this doesn't happen in the world. And so we label them schizophrenic, they're having a psychotic break, we're going to hospitalize, we're going to give them medications and we're going to take care of them. And what happens? This is actually PTSD of the most intense kind, and they're just medicated. So the system, even though the people in the system, just like doctors giving out medications that kill, they don't know it and they don't understand it, it's what they're taught. Psychiatrists are doing the same thing. Many people who have been through this kind of conditioning are hospitalized and medicated to the point to where they're not saying what is unacceptable to the powers that be. So there's a system built into this. And one of the things I do is, and I've got some writing to do first and get back to this, but I've done trainings for practitioners to understand this and to realize and to encourage people, the more people who read this material and know that it's real, when you hear about it, you don't go, oh man, okay. Instead you go, what's going on here? I've heard about this. What's happening here? If someone had the courage who felt safe enough with me to start to tell me something like this, maybe I need to listen. Maybe they saw something safe enough in me to actually say something. So we need to listen. Okay? When we have the information, there's a certain kind of beautiful responsibility that we then have. And that is to listen and to give credibility to the fact that these things happen in the world. This is important. This is how we change it. We change it at the grassroots level. And you had up there, how do we change this? It's you, it's me, it's all of us. So we speak and we share and we validate and we refer. Hey, you got some help? I heard about this website. And we help people realize that these experiences happen and that there's not something wrong with them. It's something wrong with what was done to them. And that's a very different perspective. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the Bible of psychiatry, is all about diagnosing symptoms. What's wrong with you? What's the outcome? They don't look at the source of it. And one of my heroes in the field is Bessel van der Kolk. And he's been a pioneer in trauma work. And he actually has presented to the DSM committee a new diagnosis. And it's called childhood, I forget the exact words, but basically childhood trauma. And that all these things come out of that. And one of the things the committee said back to him, he says, if we let this into the DSM, what happens to all the rest of the diagnoses? So, and I was thinking about that. I said, well, you just have to, along with secondary diagnoses, it's shown up in anxiety, depression. So part of what we're doing here today is to help change how we look at things. And not only how other people that are reporting trauma to us feel, but what's happening to us, what's happening in our own brains, and why, and who these people are, so that we can start to discern. It's not us against them. It's how can we distinguish that plant from that chair, okay? You water the plant, you don't water the chair. So it's responding to reality in a way that is appropriate, you could say, or reality-based for whatever's there. So some of the people I've worked with, I am quite certain, have been exposed to what we've been talking about with MKUltra. And I suspect for some of them, they have been part of the research for Monarch, which followed later and has been much more successful. I think there's overlap as it developed. And part of MKUltra was, among those 150 programs, was one of getting hold of more children and setting up little core groups who were practicing this out in the field. And they tended to focus on, on doctors. They tended to be associated in some way with hospitals. I've worked with people from Australia to UK, Belgium, Canada, and then across the United States. And in every country, I've found these parallels and what has happened to them. Some of them are organized pornography and torture, and they make films of this. And there's a market among psychopaths because they get to watch or they get to buy children that they can use for these proclivities, for these desires to have absolute control. And they want a child who has no fight left in them. They're completely passive, so they can have this illusion of power. And in these groups, they tend to have one leader. And of each of them I've seen, that one leader is a bona fide psychopath, has that coldness. And if my client speaks of or refers to that one leader, their whole body goes into a terror response. And working through that is an important part of their work, to where they can actually stay present when they can speak of that person. They can begin to see it. They can begin to bring themselves out of it, because the triggering they were talking about with these code words pulls them immediately into another state, that our cognitive functioning in the prefrontal cortex and our emotional presence and sense of self is offline, and we are put into another state through that trauma. And it is the fear of re-experiencing that trauma in our bodies. It's below awareness, it's totally in the body at that point, because they take the body itself to the edge of death, back and forth to the edge of death, back and forth in different ways, to where the body, basically they're training the brainstem to shut down perception in certain ways and turning off the higher centers. It's very calculated, very skilled. Okay, tap, breathe. Okay. This is real. This is real. So we, just a little bit before I go into this, the research at UCLA's, first at Caltech, and then at UCLA's Brain Research Institute. We got to see the effects of stress on the developing brain. And these were with rats, and these great big Norwegian rats. And as pups, they were cross-fostered, so we controlled for genetics. And then they were just given a little bit of cortisol for 3 days. And cortisol is the hormone. They weren't hurt, nothing was done to them, except that their body experienced the hormone that it would have produced in response to stress. And this was during the period a rat brain develops very similarly to ours. It's just all condensed. And so in these 3-day periods, certain structures in the limbic system, which I'll talk about, were developing. And with these rats, you could have, and I got real friendly with these rats. I thought they were very cool creatures. But certain of them, you could just, the ones who were stressed in one 3-day period, you could pick them up, roll them on their back, hey, whatever you want, we'll, pet them, and they were like automatically pets. There were others, if you leaned up against the cage, they'd try and tear your flesh off. Same siblings, the difference was when they were stressed. We'd sit up late at night talking about the implications of this, how that might get used. Military, okay? Build a soldier, build a spy. And by precisely influencing that research disappeared. I can't find references to it. And makes me wonder. But that was my first-hand look at how much we can be affected physiologically by stress. We have genetic components, but it's always an interface with the environment. That's how we develop. And genetic components will manifest or not, and we know this with a lot of things, depending upon the environment. That can be controlled. and they do that. So, let me get into, let's take a look at, there, get the right button. What is a psychopath? So, one of the best known pieces about a psychopath is that they have no remorse. There's no conscience. And what someone just mentioned a little bit ago, the book, The Sociopath Next Door, which is a great book, Martha Stout. Bear in mind that sociopath and psychopath get used interchangeably out there, and what I think she's actually describing are psychopaths. And that's why we're intentionally using this term here. But that is one of the key pieces that show up. There's lack of empathy. They can read you, but they can't feel you. They are often plagued by restlessness and boredom. My thinking on that is that because they have no internal emotional life, that's a good deal of our entertainment, isn't it? We're feeling things, we're responding to the environment, we're talking with a friend, and we feel a connection and we feel an aliveness of an emotional life. They don't have that. It's empty. And so they're always looking for stimulation to fill that emptiness. And they look for it using the base emotions. They need the ever-increasing stimulation, and their sole satisfaction is in controlling others, duping, manipulating, hurting. Their pleasure, if you could call it pleasure, is that control. Okay? And there are people who do it on a small scale. There are people who do it on a very large scale. So they regard others, intact people who have feelings, with contempt. They're something to be used. It's fun to toy with them and manipulate them. They cannot experience or even understand love or loyalty. It's not there. There aren't brain structures there within which they can feel that. So they may look at people either with contempt, because you have these feelings that you're so easy to manipulate by, or occasionally some of the lower ones will realize they're missing something and they'll respond with anger or hatred. But primarily, it is disdain. The disdain that you are plagued by having emotions. And it's so easy to lead you. And it's so easy to control you. But the paradox of it is that an isolated psychopath can't stand it. They have to. They're not asocial. They're antisocial. They fall under that category in the DSM. They're a special category, which are, by the way, our DSM in the US does not acknowledge. Okay, in a couple of the versions, they've just mentioned psychopathy, but never listed the characteristics of it. Only this year, the World Health Organization acknowledges psychopathy. And this year, the medical profession in the United States has accepted the World Health Organization's definitions. And so for the first time, and I've always wondered about this, the US is actually acknowledging psychopathy and sociopathy. Why would that be, I wonder? So because of this boredom and this need to connect with people, the psychopath is compelled to interact, but the way they interact is with abuse and control and dominance, and the satisfaction they get from that dominance. So they are emotional predators. So they cannot tolerate loneliness. That's what I said before. They cannot tolerate being alone. They will seek ways to amuse themselves. You know, if it shows up in children very early when they are a more biologically based psychopath, and if they can't take it out on other kids, they'll take it out on animals. If they're not allowed to take it on animals, they'll take it out on something. Insects, they'll do anything to be able to have that feeling. And it does show up very young. They are sexual predators. But more than sex, they need the power. They need the dominance. They need to know that they can actually destroy their victim. It's part of why on these larger organized groups, they have their victims, either the young women that they were talking about earlier, or the children who are prepared for them through the groups that hunt the children on their behalf. The children and the people are at a place where they offer no resistance. They will do whatever they're told. They are in a dissociated state themselves. And that's what they want. That's what they need to have, that feeling of complete control. So this quote, they need to feed their insatiable appetite for harm as well as sustain their sense of superiority by possessing and destroying others inside and out, body and soul. That is ultimately what they're after. And this Claudia Moscovici, it's on the list, I hope it got printed, but she has a really good website too that deals more with relationship, but there's good basic information. So this is an interesting thing about them. They know they can't feel, but they can mimic emotion. They study emotion in people who have feelings, who have responses, because they don't have a spontaneous response. If there's an accident, they don't have that emotion of, how can I help? Oh my God, what's happened? And you feel in yourself with your own mirroring neurons and your empathic connection. You feel something when someone else is hurt. They do not. But they know that if they don't have socially appropriate responses, other people are going to look at them and say, what's wrong with you? So they learn to fake it. And they are very good at it. And they can look more normal than normal people. And the reason they can is, one, the reason they do it is because they want to have control over others, to gain trust, especially for someone to have pity for them, or to feel sorry for them, and caring for them. Because one psychopath said, if I can get you to feel sorry for me, to feel pity, I can get you to do anything. So the reason that they can fool so many people, this is what I see, is that having no conscience, when they are acting out an emotion in order to manipulate someone, and they're playing that game of manipulation, they have no internal conflict. There's no part of them saying, oh, you're doing something wrong. They're like, oh, this is bad. Oh, look, I know they're gonna hurt at the end of this, and I don't feel good about that. There is none of that. There's no incongruence in them. And those of us who are intact, when we're looking at people to evaluate them, to get a sense of them, we tend to, often without knowing it, we're looking, are they congruent? When you're speaking to me and you're speaking about an emotion, is your body language together? Is it your energy and your emotions and your expression? Are they all congruent? And we're reading people this way. And we may not realize it, but notice next time you've met someone and you're trying to get a sense of them and something feels a little odd. And notice it's because there's something that doesn't connect. It's not in alignment, okay? And then you can get something in you, the bell goes off and it says, don't quite trust this person. Be a little, hold back, wait a little bit, see how they really behave. And this is kind of our sensing system. We sense it in our belly. We've got as much gray matter as in our brain. We sense it through our heart, our body. With a psychopath, they don't have that incongruence. They will feel completely congruent. They will act out an emotion of, oh, I love you and I cherish you, and it seems incredibly sincere. And they can do this because they have no conscience, which makes it more difficult. We can't only trust that reader in ourselves. For the majority of people, it works beautifully. For a psychopath, they love the fact that we read that way, and they use that. So one psychopath, as a demonstration of how they don't see it, when shown a picture of a face showing intense fear, noted that he didn't know what that was, but people showed that face when he was about to kill them. This is one who was incarcerated, by the way, one of the less functioning ones. Psychopathic woman who witnessed an accident where another woman's child was seriously injured, was untouched by the event, but went home to practice the mother's expressions in the mirror so she could use them herself to affect others. Okay? Kind of lands. Yes, tap, breathe. This is a breathing time. So psychopaths really do have a different brain structure. And we now have MRIs, we have functional MRIs, we have ways to be able to understand the brain. And there's some research at King's College in London. And it was shown, this is only one of a whole volume of research that's been done on them. There was significantly reduced gray matter volumes in the anterior rostral prefrontal cortex and temporal poles. That means where this front part of our brain, right behind our forehead, this is where our higher emotional centers are, in the midline and just right in here. And so these structures have to do with empathy, connection with other people, mirroring neurons for caring. They have to do actually with, I think I got it on here. I've got a list a little bit further on, we'll get to. But damage to these areas that have to do especially with emotional connection and social connection and conscience. If I've done something wrong, then it gives me an experiential feeling, an emotion when I've done something wrong. A conscience is, we get a whole body feeling from that. Damage to these areas is associated with impaired empathy, a poor response to fear and distress in others. Okay, we're not registering, we don't have the mirroring neurons, we don't, you have this odd look on your face, why is that? And a lack of self-conscious emotions such as guilt or embarrassment. Okay, those are self-reflective feelings. They don't self-reflect. They're not able to. Okay, which means that when they're looking at their own behavior, they see nothing wrong with it. It's just, this is what I want to do. So the other part of this is the neuronal connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, which is our emotional and our reactive center. It's our limbic system is an older part of our brain, has to do with survival, it has to do with comparing memory with sensory input at the time. Are we in danger? They are smaller and more disorganized than normal people's brains. And I'll go into more of this in a little bit. The amygdala, which is the trip point in our limbic system that says danger, turns on our autonomic nervous system, fight, flight, or freeze, that part is smaller. So there's an interesting kind of paradox that the psychopath does not experience fear. When we learn, if we have a bad something happen because we did something, and it's punishment or it's a not good outcome, it's like we feel fear. We don't want to do that again. The psychopath doesn't have that happen. So especially among the ones who have been incarcerated, they don't tend to learn. Incarceration has no effect. They go out and they're going to do what they do in prison, they're going to do when they get out in prison, they're going to do it again when they're in prison again. Because it's what they do. And it's how they are, and they don't learn from that experience, and they don't learn from punishment. And they also, this is an odd other piece of it, they don't tend to be traumatized in childhood abuse the way other people are either. It's very strange. They can get ticked off about it, and they can feel some vengeance, but they're not traumatized because they don't feel the same fear. So that's kind of an odd side piece to it. So what does this mean? The brain is more reactive to the base emotions. Okay, limbic system, brainstem, rage, power, control, those kinds of emotions. There is, because both the structures aren't there and there's reduced connection, this part of our brain that has compassion, conscience, empathy, can sense what another person's feeling. That neurologically has a modulating or inhibitory effect on those responses of anger, rage, flight. They don't flee much because they don't feel fear, but they feel the rage. There's not much that modulates that. So when those are triggered, it's like they're compelled to act them out. Now the ones who are higher functioning can kind of control it. Okay, I can't do it right here, but I'm going to set up this situation where I can. And they do. The primitive emotions are intense, and there is little internal ability to control those urges or emotional reactions. The brain is more reactive to the base. The modulation isn't there, the primitive emotions, some of this little internal ability to control those urges. And the small amygdala, like I was saying, means that there's little fear of the consequences or dangers. There's not much to hold them back. So how do these brain differences show in behavior? We see the emotionally shallow, manipulative, cruel, conscienceless predator we've been describing today. So there's a correlation between these brain structures and the behavior. So as I was going to talk about this limbic system. So the amygdala, the limbic system is, I'll have a picture of it after I say some of this. It's in kind of the middle of our brain, and it will keep us alive when need be. Okay, someone's cut in front of you on the freeway and you're out of control. If you have to stop and think, oh, wait a minute, this car just came in and I've turned this way and I'm skidding that way, and if I'm going, see, which way do I turn the steering wheel? Okay, the limbic system switches off our higher centers. We don't have to think. And it turns on other centers where we have learned with the car. We've learned in our implicit memory, in our cerebellum, we've learned how to steer that. And you'll find you've steered through cars and you don't know how it happened, but you're sure grateful. Okay, you're in danger, and if you've ever felt this, in danger, you get this welling up, almost feeling taken over, and you have incredible energy to run, or to fight back, or to do whatever is needed in the moment, for the mother to lift the car off her child. Okay, that's when the limbic system takes over. The amygdala switches on a lot of systems in our body to be able to do that. And it's checking sensory input from the outside all the time against our own memories. And if we've got a lot of trauma memories circulating in there, it's going to constantly be comparing what's happening out there against that memory. That's where triggers come from. So it's saying, uh-oh, that person looked at me that way. And you're not consciously thinking it. Your limbic system is doing it for you and saying, that's just how so-and-so looked before they hit me. And your whole system goes into alert. You feel a dump of adrenaline into your bloodstream. It activates the autonomic nervous system. That then is the brainstem. Okay? And the brainstem takes over, changes heart rate, blood pressure, where the blood flows in our body, breathing patterns, changes all sorts of things. But it also, what the amygdala does, and this is key to what we'll be talking about later, the amygdala shuts off our higher brain centers. So the amygdala is like, I like to look at it as rabbit ears, okay? And so we've got our rabbit ears, and when we're happy and safe, they're pointing upward, and we're curious about the world. It's activating our higher brain centers. Okay, we can think, we can feel, we can evaluate, we're relaxed, and we're exploring the world. Danger comes, it flips down. It's almost like a switch. And when it flips down, this part's turned off. It flips down toward the brainstem and the autonomic nervous system, and we are on autopilot. We have our survival system running our whole body and our perceptions. Because our perceptions narrow, we are focused only on the survival. And this, for people who have PTSD, who have been abused, this happens automatically. It's like the thermostat is set too low and the heater comes on, way before it's a comfortable temperature. It's always coming on, it's coming on, and we're flipping down and we're flipping down, and it's like the world is a dangerous place, and we stay at an ongoing level of hypervigilance, it's called, of an arousal state in our autonomic nervous system. Adrenaline is always flowing in our systems. That's why people get adrenal fatigue with PTSD. They get other diseases with the immune system because it suppresses the immune system. And these are all signs of the amygdala being overly sensitized by trauma. So that's why I say the memory processing system goes offline when the amygdala is tripped. Oops, let me go back for a second. This other piece, the hippocampus, is also a portion of the amygdala that when we're relaxed, that is what turns experience into memory of experience, okay? And this is also an on-off switch. When the amygdala is tripped, the hippocampus is off. When the amygdala is relaxed and off, the hippocampus comes online. And the hippocampus is what says, oh yeah, I had a sandwich at break over here, you know, and it's pretty good, and I did it this way, and last week I did this or that, and I have memory, I have access, and I know I'm remembering. It's a sensation we have. We know it's a memory. When we have unprocessed memory, when it hasn't gone through the hippocampus and it's actually stored in different parts of the brain after it's been processed through the hippocampus. If that hasn't happened, if that memory gets touched through a triggering, we don't know we're remembering, we're in the memory. This is what a flashback is for PTSD. We are actually reliving it. This is the combat vet who drops and rolls when he hears a car backfire, okay? Because he's back in that combat setting and he's running for cover. And his nervous system and his memories don't know that he's here and it's over. So the healing actually is to be able to keep the amygdala quiet enough, keep it tuned to the higher centers, and the higher centers active enough to where we can actually, the hippocampus can do its job. And what was traumatic becomes just memory, and the emotion is released. And we can look at it and go, yeah, that happened. And it was bad. But I'm here now, and I don't forget that I'm here. So this is the limbic system in the middle. Here's the amygdala, and that's the cortex. The frontal cortex and prefrontal cortex are up in there. And that's our brain. And it's a pretty cool thing. So the prefrontal cortex I've been talking about are higher emotional centers, social connections, empathy, moral guidance and conscience, and access to spiritual experiences. You want me to go back? No, okay. No. So, and it directly acts on the amygdala to regulate responses. That's what I was talking about. It's when it's functioning well, and we can develop this. Meditation helps develop it. There's a way of being, I call it witnessing awareness from my Taoist background, but in Buddhist it's called mindfulness, and this is coming into psychology a lot now, and then with the term mindfulness, and that activates that way of regulating the amygdala. So why bother with all this brain function if we're talking about psychopaths? Because they know about it, the really organized ones do. And they've been using it against us. So they know how we will react. And they know how to structure our experiences. So we'll go down the right cattle chute, the one they want us to go down. Okay? So if they can put us in a state, then we don't have any power. Our limbic system, our amygdala, has taken over. Okay? And they really do have power over us. So how do we take that power back? We learn how we process information. We learn how we process experience. And we learn how to affect that. We can affect whether or not we go into fight, flight, or freeze. There's a point where they could push us beyond that. If they had us in the kinds of situations that Fred was talking about, with drugs and overwhelm, it would overwhelm that ability. Some people have an amazing ability to hold that and to affect bodily functions. The more we practice it, it's a lifelong practice, the more benefit we get from the practices that develop this, including spiritual benefits. So whether or not we go into fight, flight, or freeze affects whether or not we can think. Like I said, when those rabbit ears go down in fear, we don't get access to the part of our brain that can think and evaluate and say, okay, what's going on? What could I really do? What are my options? The only options our brain will perceive are the ones that say, get out of here, or buy that product, or, shut down. Don't speak about that. Okay? That's going on a lot. Don't talk about this kind of stuff, because it is sort of like behind the scenes, and you just find your mouth closed. So our brains, when the amygdala is tripped, will react not just to real danger. We may not actually have a tiger after us. Okay? In that case, go for it, amygdala. You're going to save my hiney. But when we're seeing danger that either isn't there because we have stored memory from trauma, or we're seeing danger at a below verbal level, we're sensing it in the environment, we're getting conflicting messages, we're getting the sense, man, something's happened and I can't put my finger on it, I can't name it. It's really hard when we can't name what's going on, because it then, our brain automatically goes into a stress state because we can't make sense of what's there. When we can't perceive what's going on, and we can't make an informed decision, we will take that cattle chute because it looks good at the moment. It's been painted, weapons of mass destruction. We've got to protect ourselves, okay? This is the setup of problem, reaction, solution. The person who sets up the problem and knows how our brain reacts and then offers us the solution they want will direct the whole populace. And we're done for. We're in a war, we're in an economic crisis, we're in a housing bubble, and we're fighting for survival. And the more we're fighting for survival, the less we have our higher centers available, and the more reactive, the more desperate we are for some answer. We're offered an answer and like, oh, thanks. Okay, let me have an answer. So let's look at how a not pre-traumatized brain in a healthy environment reacts to stress, how we are designed to handle stress, okay? We don't have to go into all the pieces of this, but say there's an overwhelming event. There's a trauma. We have the amygdala trips, we have an autonomic nervous system reaction, then we have all these body states, and we have the unprocessed experience, because, okay, hippocampus is offline, higher centers are offline, we've got an experiential memory. It hasn't been processed. The trauma event ends. There's often shock, okay? We feel alone, especially if there's been an abuse or something secretive, but we also feel that like after an auto wreck, and in a healthy setting, the key is that green circle. That key is where, when safety returns, literal physical safety, there is connection. There's support. There are people who can hear us, understand. We can speak of what's happened to us, and they go, yeah, man, that was really bad, and yeah, but you did really good, or you just, or these are the people who did it and you didn't. We often will, especially if it's a more secretive kind of abuse, sexual abuse, or some sort of manipulation. We feel shame and we feel guilt for it. But when someone comes and says, no, that person really did it, and they pulled the wool over your eyes, or they tricked you, and we need to hold accountable the people who did this. And your whole nervous system starts to go, oh, okay, I'm getting a context, and which means that we're processing. Safety happens, the amygdala relaxes, the hippocampus comes back online, and we have connection with our higher centers and our emotional centers, and we gain an understanding of the event. So there it is. The limbic system and the autonomic nervous system come back to normal. We reconnect with a sense of self. And often we come back after that experience with more adaptability, more health, more recognition that I can handle that. I can come through things. more self-trust and integration. So what happens when we don't have that green circle and that connection and understanding? This then is the trauma loop. Okay, so the other one was open-ended. Okay, we end up in a higher place. With a trauma loop, when we get to that green circle, there's no reconnection, no support, no place to share. We can't relate to it. In fact, often people will judge us. And that adds to the shame. Shame shuts us down even more. So when that happens, there's confusion. There's more dissociation, isolation. I must be bad because this happened to me. I must be bad because I can't make sense of it. I must be bad because I have all of these bad feelings and no one has validated it or understands it, so it must be my fault. And we tend, from childhood on up, that tends to be an automatic assumption that it's our own fault. So then we're in this high state of anxiety. The limbic system is already partly activated all the time. It's like, does anyone see how bad I am? Does anyone see that, that I'm not getting it? That something must be wrong with me? And did she see it? Did he see it? And we go around in this state of agitation. So then, if something happens in the environment, like I was saying earlier, someone looks at me in that particular way, my system's halfway there already, and it fires again, and I'm re-triggered. And that's what happens. Then, with the triggering, we are re-experiencing that trauma. And this is what happens with PTSD. This is what happens with people who have been controlled and abused, and they're living with this loop. And I would propose that a mild version of this is happening in this country at a high level since 9/11. We were very intentionally traumatized. And then a second trauma with the anthrax. And, okay, not only are you not, the people in this building weren't safe, now anyone opening their mail, okay? And it's suggested out there that that was not that was done intentionally as the second punch for that trauma. So in this country now, we have the constant states of alarm in every airport you go into. You're going to see, is it code yellow, code orange? Keeping that going. And like you were saying, like Fred was saying, for the people who are really traumatized intentionally, if they get it kicked up about every month, they will never come out of that trauma, out of that multiple DID. So, the organized psychopaths that have been spoken about today know this. They've known it for a long time. And they have refined how to keep this going in people, how to, on a large scale, keep the populace activated, and when they work on people individually, how to keep kicking it up, how to manipulate it. And as we said earlier about the nature of a psychopath, they get off on that. That's fun. That's a game for them. Oh man, got that one again. And even the low-level ones in the workplace, and they just go by and just, drop a little nasty comment that no one else can hear, and you're all upset, and everyone says, look at you and say, "What's wrong with you?" Okay, that's a very simple way that a psychopath will get their jollies. Okay. So they use it on individual victims for programming through the trauma-based mind control that we've been talking about. And they use it on the mass social scale. And they are very good at it. They've been studying this for decades. And as one of you was saying, Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, is who translated that from Freud's often paranoid-driven internal drivers to, boy, it sounds like a psychopath to me. How can we use those aspects of normal people? How can we make money off of that? So how can we counter this outside control of our inside experience? Because that is the most intimate kind of violation okay? If someone else is controlling my internal world, it's like, I don't like that. I don't want that to happen. So can we influence or direct our own amygdala? How do we change this? Owning our own power. There are practices out there we know, we've been talking about them today, but this is, yes, we absolutely can in several ways actually influence the way our own brain responds to the world. We can actually, with practices that we do, we actually can change our own brain structures. The brain responds like any muscle. It responds to how we use it, okay? We start using those connections from the prefrontal cortex down to the amygdala more, we get more of that connection. There's more communication. There's less automatic reaction. And we can do things specifically, learning what's going on in our environment, because our environment is set up to be triggering our own amygdala without our realizing it until we're already struggling with the shakes after a bunch of adrenaline is in our nervous system, in our bloodstream. By the way, if you do get an adrenaline dump, here's a little trick. If adrenaline is meant to be metabolized by muscles, and if you've ever had, you've been scared and you feel shaky afterward, just flex and release all the big muscles in your body. It would be as if you were running, and that very, very quickly metabolizes the adrenaline. If you don't metabolize it through the muscle, then it's slow and you feel crummy and it's like, ugh. And so that's a little trick. If that ever happens, you can help your body process that adrenaline. So there's some practical things. Looking at our environment, and we've been talking about that today, we can choose what we expose our nervous systems and our bodies to. So learn about the media, learn about food, learn about environmental toxins, not from the, oh my gosh, I'm going to be overwhelmed, I'm terrified, I can't do anything. It's, yes, we can do something. There's certain things we can't in the air or whatever. We can also, we might have some choice where we live, but we can choose our water, we can choose our food, we can choose what we watch in the media, we can choose what we read. We can choose what we listen to on the radio, TV. So we do have that choice. And exercising that choice strengthens that muscle. And it doesn't mean we don't follow what's going on, but choose sources for your news that are not into the drama and the fear and the, oh my, we're all together in this horrible situation and we can't do anything about it. That kind of group feeling will pull our nervous system. We're a social species, okay? You ever see a herd of antelope and one antelope has the reaction because that one saw the lion and the whole herd is just up and gone because they all have the feeling, almost like a morphic field. They feel that one alarm bell and they all go. We have that too. And if we don't use our higher centers, our brains will respond the same way. They bank on that. They structure it, they plan that. So something else we can do is like that green circle, is connecting with others who are balanced, who are thoughtful, who are not reactive, who have developed this or are developing this capacity to self-regulate, not let the environment regulate us. That's a huge piece. And that's a piece we've been talking about these with things that we can do. We are directly affecting our own amygdala to redirect the reaction that the psychopaths want. That's empowerment. So one of the other things we can do is, you ever notice that internal conversation? Oh, what did you do that for? Put the toothbrush in the wrong place. You didn't do that right, and just, oh man, I took the wrong turn again. That little internal dialogue, or even just if it's more neutral, just, talking to ourselves, especially the one that's critical. And usually, for most people, I find it's coming over the right shoulder. I'm usually reversing when I'm facing someone. So it's, that voice tends to come kind of from over here, and it's looking at us. And it's whoever was critical in our past gets internalized. And kind of their voice goes away and it sounds like our own voice, okay? So it's going, and you got it, and you're going, and you're defending, you say, no, wait a minute, wasn't so bad, or that internal dialogue, we can start to become aware of that. We can start to counter it. Because usually what we're doing is, it's the judge up on the bench and we're the defendant going, okay, what did I do wrong? Or how do I defend it? No, it really wasn't what you're thinking. And you picture the cop pulling you over and because you're going too fast. As simple as those things. It takes up a lot of our RAM, actually, without our paying attention to it. Stop and turn around and go, hey, cool it. I want to just do this. Okay? This is like taking meditation into daily life. Say, no, I'm not going to be in this internal dialogue that's on autopilot from someone way in my past. I want to live my life right now. I want to experience this, feel this. What's the texture of my life? What's the feeling in my body? What's the aliveness in my body? How am I here and present? How can I feel? What's the weight of this bone structure in my shoes? What does that feel like? Okay? I start to come back into my own body. And come on, take a deep breath. Okay? And we start to live. We start to feel that relaxing and soothing. And that has a very distinct effect on our own brain, on our amygdala. Because our amygdala is listening to the environment, it's listening to our memory, it's also listening to the sensory input from our body. And when we get tense, it's getting that message, okay, the body's tense, there must be something going on, and the amygdala ramps up. We can intentionally calm our body and give a different signal to our own amygdala. And little by little, we can change the thermostat range for that amygdala. We can change our own amygdala's response range to where it would take a whole lot more. They'd have to work a whole lot harder to send us into that state. And we can stay present. There's an auto-rec, and you go calm, and okay, what needs to happen? We can deal with it. My heart's here, we're connected, you need help, you're okay, okay, we can deal with it. We don't panic and freeze or run. We can stay present. Then we can stay present for the people we love. We can stay present for ourselves. One of the other ways is through meditation, like I was saying, the Buddhist term of mindfulness. Mindfulness is staying present to ourselves, staying present, what I was just describing, to our own experience. Being here, like in this moment, being here, this beautiful connection between us, okay? Being able to share this. It's a whole body experience. There's an aliveness to it. And we can live that way. And the more we cultivate this kind of mindfulness, then when something frightening happens, or when we start to touch a memory maybe from our childhood where something really was terrifying and overwhelming, we can stay here. And then this presence activates our prefrontal cortex, which calms the amygdala, which allows the hippocampus to come online, and that old experience gets processed. The emotion is released from it. The memory, it becomes a memory of something that happens rather than an experience we're reliving. This is the heart of healing from trauma. But it takes time especially for people who have been hugely traumatized, who have been intentionally, all their desire to love and connect has been betrayed and used and turned against them. It takes time for that to be found, to be able to stay present, because the amygdala is so trained. But even in that kind of abuse, we can come out of it. For those of us who have not been traumatized to that degree, something like mindfulness is life-changing, that we can actually be alive to our own lives. EFT is a process. These points, they're just two of the points that I use, that EFT uses to help the body stay awake, to help the energy continue flowing through the body when we're talking about or touching feelings that are overwhelming. And I find there's another one I use, EMDR. Didn't put it up here because it's tricky. It mimics REM sleep, and it accesses memory. And unless you have a strong presence, a strong witnessing awareness, then it can be overwhelming. But what I do is they both will do both, but I use EMDR to open the can and EFT to empty it out, the emotional content. And then it gets to be a memory, and you can think about it without trauma. But it's this dance on how we bring up experience and meet it. We can be present with it. You don't have to use these techniques, but be present with it. And then our brain is designed. It's this incredible, I'm in awe of it. I love talking about it. Because our whole system is designed to heal. It's designed to process experience. So the other more external ways that we can deal with this is to take action in positive ways. Learning what others are doing to bring about change in healthy ways, okay? Coming here. Sharing what you know, even if it's uncomfortable in our oppressive environment. That's courage. That's speaking truth, which has the added benefit of we feel more congruent and we feel more whole when we speak truth. We haven't been silenced. We get to be more real. So these are the ways we can own our power in the face of the very real and alive psychopaths who are out there, who are hugely funded and organized. But their vulnerability is, if we know this and we develop this, we won't go down the cattle chute they want. That's our power. Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. Yes?
You mentioned a few times, but I don't know if you could actually define the difference between psychopath and sociopath.
That's actually a very good question, because there is not a single definition out there. That's what, I've been digging for months to say, okay, what would I say to that question? So the question is, what is the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths? And it has changed over time. Years ago, psychopaths were defined, this is in my early training, psychopaths were what we've been describing here. Sociopaths could have close connections, sort of like the Godfather, and have emotional connections with their family, although I don't think he actually did in that, now that I, relook at that. But they could have emotional connections with their close family, but society at large was, something to be used. These days, and then psychopath kind of faded out, and everyone was a sociopath, psychopaths and sociopaths. And now they're distinguishing it more, and the sociopath is one that is, to tell you the truth, I'm kind of making this up. but it's more like the sociopath like I was saying with the Godfather, can kind of have some connections and want a little bit more of connection, but they can't feel. They're like on the continuum. They're not as far out as a psychopath. But like I said, they're using them interchangeably. There are some really good books out there, and they're talking about like the sociopath next door. She's describing a psychopath. And so just know, with those terms, it's a free-for-all. Yes?
I would just like to suggest, I like your presentation very much. I'd just like to
Thank
suggest
you.
that psychopaths are actually performing a function within spiritual evolution, because they're presenting us with a challenge that unless we confront it by unfolding our love and compassion, the suffering will keep getting more and more and more, and we'll be complacent in our little Ozzie and Harriet world.
Yes. Leave it to Beaver.
So they're serving a purpose. To me, that helps me to have compassion towards them and to know that they're serving a function and I can respond
Yes.
positively to their negative.
So the comment, the excellent comment is that psychopaths are actually serving a function to our spiritual evolution. Correct me if I don't get this. And they are serving a function in that they are challenging us. And I'll expand on that, is at what point do we say, hold a boundary? At what point do we stand in our center and say no? Without being in reaction, just in reaction or becoming like them. So that's an important place in our development to be able to stand, and they challenge us to that, and they serve that function. At the same time, yes, have compassion for them, but compassion has discernment. And with discernment, we can see, I think in the interview I was talking, if you have a bunny rabbit and a rattlesnake, and I want everyone to be the same, and I won't discern the differences, you could have a shortened life. Okay, and I do agree that they are a challenge, because in many ways we've become complacent. And this is a wake-up call to what's going on. Did you? Okay. Yes.
You described the trauma loop very well, but in terms of things to do about it, since the shortest pathway is physiological and not psychological, besides using self-talk or cognitive, emotional ways of trying to reverse it, you might think of using, like respiration, as an immediate pathway to re-regulate heart rate, heart rhythm, and to indicate back to the amygdala that you're relaxing and quieting the system.
Absolutely.
So using that, you actually have a more immediate pathway than trying to do self-talk.
Yes. Your suggestion is that using something as breathing, using the physiological pathway to calming the amygdala is more direct. And you're absolutely right.
And more immediate.
And more immediate.
And the way that might work is not what physicians often tell their patients to do, which is take a deep breath and relax, which actually stimulates higher ANS arousal. But
if it's a fast breath, yes.
Yeah, if it is a deep breath, then
Deep and relaxed will
instead
calm.
Take a normal breath and go from there to a nice, long, slow exhale.
Yes.
And you can get immediate reduction.
Yes, you can. And that is,
People don't think of it.
it's a very important technique. Well, you're right. Taking a normal breath and then a long, slow exhale is an excellent way to directly access through the respiratory centers in the brainstem the message to the amygdala to calm. What can happen with trauma, and say, for example, in a panic attack, there's not enough higher center to even talk to ourselves or take a breath like that. And so we need other ways. And practicing something like that actually builds those pathways ahead of time.
That's right. Without the practice, the person isn't, if you're in the case of a panic attack.
Exactly. Or anxiety. So all of this, it builds on each other. The more we practice calm, presence, self-awareness, the more it'll be there if something happens. And if we don't have the wherewithal, that we're caught in the fight, flight, or freeze, which if we can't fight, we can't flee, which is the sympathetic nervous system, then the parasympathetic nervous system steps in and we go into freeze. And these are how animals will survive an attack at times. And their whole nervous system looks like it's dead. And the predator lets go, and then they can jump up and run away. We go into chronic freeze with chronic abuse. And so we've got 2 layers to go through. But if we're in that state, we can't. That's where in that green circle, we need others to help us find that. We need the connection. When we have human connection and holding, could say, if not physical holding, there's like a space that's held where we're safe, where we're heard, we're believed, then that change, our whole neurology changes.
Yeah, in the longer term, that's certainly
Yes.
very vital. But I think in the short term, people might learn, I do a lot of work with biofeedback and feedback.
Biofeedback is an excellent way to
You
gain
can
that.
learn these skills.
Yes, you learn, biofeedback is an excellent way to learn these skills to calm your own body. Yeah, beautiful. I've done biofeedback and it's amazing stuff. Or 30 years of meditation, you know. Yes,
Do you practice locally, or do you have a practice?
I do, and I'm in Medford, Oregon. But probably more of my practice is by phone than
Okay.
in person, but yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have a break, about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have the panel. Thank you.